an 8-foot bioengineered predator with adaptive camouflage and reflexes, 40 times faster than humans just landed in an Oregon farmer's field.
Its mission: conquer Earth by eliminating leadership. The farmer's response: "You're blocking my sunlight." This is how humanity's most fearsome alien encounter began and ended with a shovel. The Krellian Empire's expansion strategy demonstrated a certain bureaucratic elegance, like sending a single surgical instrument rather than an entire medical team. Their entire conquest model relied on psychological efficiency, not military occupation. They'd dispatch one apex predator to eliminate planetary leadership and watch civilizations collapse from the top down. No messy invasions, no resource-draining occupations, just clean, predictable regime change through targeted terror. This method had succeeded against species that should have been untouchable. They'd conquered civilizations protected by energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts, cultures with warriors who could read thoughts before they formed, and worlds surrounded by defensive grids that could incinerate entire fleets. None of it mattered. The Empire understood that advanced technology means nothing when facing a perfectly engineered fear response. Their success relied on a fundamental truth of sentient psychology. Overwhelming displays of power trigger predictable panic. Civilizations that should have mounted coordinated defenses instead fractured into competing factions, each convinced the others had brought this upon them. The Empire's psychological profiling algorithms could map a species' collapse before the first shot was fired. Vexthor represented their masterpiece of applied terror. His specifications read like a weapons catalog from some dystopian future. Adaptive camouflage that could mimic any environment. 4 limbs capable of independent combat maneuvers. Neural processing that operated at 40 times human baseline. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a walking psychological operation, designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance through sheer biological superiority. Earth should have been their easiest conquest yet. Divided governments arguing over trivialities, no unified planetary defense, technology that hadn't yet left its own solar system. The Imperial analysts marked it as a textbook application of their protocol. They projected complete societal collapse within 72 hours of first contact. What their models failed to account for was practical indifference. Their entire psychological warfare framework assumed the target would be psychologically engaged with the threat. The simulations couldn't process a response that treated interstellar conquest as a minor agricultural nuisance. Meanwhile, on a small blue-green planet in an unremarkable solar system, a retired engineer was having trouble with his tomatoes. The soil acidity wasn't quite right, and the early blight was showing up sooner than expected. He'd already adjusted the irrigation schedule twice that week, and now he was considering whether the new compost mixture might be affecting nutrient absorption. The approaching thunderstorm concerned him more than any theoretical alien invasion. At least he could cover the plants against. Rain Gideon Hartwell's world occupied precisely 12 acres of southwestern Oregon. At 58, he treated retirement as a second career. His days followed irrigation cycles and soil testing schedules with the same precision he once applied to aircraft schematics. The transition from Boeing engineering to farming felt less like a change of profession and more like applying the same systematic problem-solving to a different medium. Soil pH levels demanded the same attention as titanium stress tolerances. Plant diseases required the same diagnostic rigor as engine failures. His neighbor Cassie Rodrigo documented sustainable farming practices for a regional agricultural journal. She filmed composting techniques and interviewed smallholders about crop rotation. She occasionally teased Gideon about his overly methodical approach, the spreadsheets tracking each tomato plant's yield, the humidity sensors wired through the greenhouse. Secretly, she admired his results. His vegetables grew with improbable consistency, as if engineered rather than cultivated. Gideon approached agriculture with an engineer's mindset. Aphid infestations became optimization problems. A leaking irrigation line prompted a material analysis of replacement fittings. He tested variables, adjusting nitrogen levels in one plot, comparing mulch types in another. Every challenge resolved into observable data, testable hypotheses, and implementable solutions. He didn't fight nature, he negotiated with it. This practical mindset represented a cognitive framework the Krellian threat models couldn't process. Their simulations understood fear, aggression, even calculated counterattacks. They had response protocols for panic and defiance. They had no category for someone assessing an alien invasion in terms of its agricultural impact. Where Imperial analysts saw vulnerable political structures, Gideon saw potential soil compaction from landing craft. Their tactical assessments noted undefended population centers. He would have noted obstructed sunlight affecting crop growth. Research into adaptive expertise shows how domain-specific knowledge transfers unexpectedly to novel situations. An engineer doesn't just solve engineering problems. They learn how to solve problems. Gideon's farming wasn't just growing food, it was continual practical experimentation. He'd spent years developing intuitions about systems behavior, whether dealing with aircraft tolerances or zucchini yields. His entire existence constituted a blind spot in galactic conquest protocols. The Empire's psychological models assumed every sentient being prioritized self-preservation and territorial control. They couldn't compute a threat response that valued tomato yields over interstellar politics. Their profiling algorithms mapped hierarchies of fear and aggression, not concerns about early blight or proper drainage. Humanity's defense wouldn't be mounted from command centers or military installations. It would emerge from a cucumber patch where the primary concern was proper vine spacing. The Empire had prepared for generals and politicians. They got a retired engineer worried about nutrient absorption rates. When the shadow fell across his field that Tuesday morning, Gideon's first thought wasn't about invasion. He calculated the light deprivation stress on his plants. The sudden cooling might affect the pollination rates. He made a mental note to check the soil temperature later. Whatever was blocking the sun better not compact the delicate root systems near the surface. Vexthor's arrival adhered to established interstellar intimidation protocols with theatrical precision. His craft descended through the atmosphere not with subtlety, but with deliberately conspicuous energy signatures that distorted local communications and left ozone in its wake. The 8-foot predator emerged amid crackling auroras of manipulated plasma, each movement calculated to maximize the spectacle. His vocal projection system boomed the standard declaration across the valley. "I am the apex predator of your species." The performance aimed to short-circuit rational thought and trigger deep-seated fear responses. Deputy Mills, responding to erratic 911 calls about strange lights, arrived to find his training utterly inadequate. His procedural manual contained protocols for domestic disputes, traffic violations, and even bear sightings. Nothing covering bioengineered extraterrestrials. He vacillated between reaching for his sidearm, calling for state police backup, or considering whether this fell under some obscure ecclesiastical jurisdiction. The dissonance between his small-town duties and the cosmic threat left him mentally paralyzed. A reaction the Empire's psychologist would have catalogued as perfectly predictable. This theatrical intimidation had crumbled civilizations with far more impressive defensive capabilities. Species protected by energy shields that could withstand stellar radiation had fragmented when confronted with the psychological warfare. Cultures with telepathic warriors found their abilities useless against something engineered specifically to bypass cognitive defenses. The performance wasn't about physical threat, it was about demonstrating the futility of resistance through overwhelming theatricality. Psychological research confirms that dramatic power displays often create cognitive overload, making compliance more likely. The brain's threat response prioritizes flashy stimuli over rational assessment. The Empire had weaponized this vulnerability across dozens of conquests, using spectacle to trigger instinctive submission rather than calculated resistance. Gideon observed the display from beside his tomato plants with the detached curiosity of a technician evaluating new equipment. His engineering background processed the visual phenomena as measurable data rather than threat. He noted the energy signature's effects on nearby electronics, the material properties of the alien's carapace, even how the plasma emissions might affect soil acidity. His mental calculations ran toward potential agricultural applications. Could that energy manipulation be adapted for greenhouse lighting? Would the camouflage technology have pest control applications? Where Deputy Mills saw an existential threat, Gideon saw variables and potential utilities. His analytical framework treated the alien as another environmental factor to be assessed and accommodated. The dramatic pronouncements registered as noise pollution, the crackling energy fields as potential irrigation hazards, the alien's carefully rehearsed proclamation of superiority met with a practical observation about solar obstruction. "You're blocking my sunlight," Gideon noted, more concerned with photosynthesis rates than interspecies domination. The statement carried no fear, no defiance, only factual observation about horticultural conditions. Vexthor's psychological warfare playbook contained no response protocols for complaints about lighting conditions. His entire operational framework assumed the target would be psychologically engaged with the threat. The Empire had prepared for screams, for weapons fire, for attempts at negotiation. They had no contingency for someone treating their apex predator as an inconvenient shade source. This initial exchange established the operational paradigm for everything that followed. The Empire's carefully crafted terror tactics would repeatedly collide with earthly pragmatism. Their psychological models couldn't process a response that valued tomato yields over interstellar politics. The confrontation became less about conquest and more about incompatible frameworks for assessing value and threat. The Empire's stealth technology represented millennia of optical engineering refinement. Vexthor's adaptive camouflage could bend light around his form with microscopic precision, matching textures and colors to any environment. It had defeated advanced sensor arrays and military-grade detection systems across dozens of worlds. The system should have rendered him invisible against the variegated greens of Gideon's garden, a perfect application of their technological superiority. Gideon noticed the anomaly not through advanced instruments but through ecological observation. The bees were avoiding a particular patch of air near the compost heap. Their flight paths curved around an invisible obstruction with precise aversion. Where the Empire's technology fooled light waves, it couldn't disguise the subtle electromagnetic disturbances or scent signatures that triggered insect avoidance behaviors. The honeybees' navigation systems detected something human eyes missed entirely. Entomological research shows insects perceive environmental changes through multiple sensory channels beyond human perception. Bees detect magnetic field variations, subtle temperature gradients, and chemical signatures imperceptible to human senses. Their avoidance behaviors often indicate invisible disturbances, long before technology registers them. The Empire had engineered against surveillance systems, not pollinators. Cassie's documentary work accidentally captured the anomaly. She was filming pollination patterns for her agricultural channel when her camera's autofocus struggled with a patch of seemingly empty air. The footage showed subtle light distortions, not because she was looking for aliens, but because she was documenting zucchini blossom development. Her equipment registered the camouflage's imperfections through automated focus hunting and exposure adjustments. Advanced technology often fails against simple observation grounded in domain-specific knowledge. The Empire's engineers had anticipated military countermeasures, not agricultural awareness. Their systems were designed to defeat purpose-built detection systems, not the incidental observations of someone tracking plant health. Gideon's understanding of natural patterns created detection capabilities no military could replicate. Vexthor's greatest asset became his most obvious liability. Every attempt at stealth created ecological disturbances that stood out against the garden's natural rhythms. The absence of insects in particular areas, the slight depressions in soft soil, the way morning dew formed on invisible surfaces, all became visible tells to someone attuned to environmental details. The hunter's technological advantage evaporated in an ecosystem that registered his presence through 100 subtle indicators. Earth's natural systems became an early warning network that outperformed any defense grid. The bees' avoidance patterns, the soil compression, even the way birds gave certain areas wider berth, all contributed to a distributed detection system the Empire hadn't anticipated. Their psychological models accounted for fear responses, not ecological awareness. The hunter's attempts at intimidation continued meeting practical assessment. Vexthor would reappear with dramatic energy displays, only to find Gideon adjusting irrigation lines or testing soil samples. The performances that had crumbled civilizations became background noise to someone more concerned with proper moisture levels. The aliens' theatricality registered as less relevant than the weather forecast. As Vexthor attempted to maintain his intimidating presence, Gideon continued his gardening routine with methodical precision. The aliens' movements became just another variable in the agricultural equation, something to work around rather than confront. The Empire's psychological warfare model kept encountering a problem it couldn't solve: how to intimidate someone who viewed you as an irrigation obstacle. The confrontation's turning point arrived not through military escalation, but through tool distribution. Gideon's frustration with the aliens' persistent obstruction manifested not as fear or anger, but as practical problem-solving. He handed Vexthor a watering can with the same absent-minded efficiency he might show a visiting neighbor. The gesture contained no hostility, only the assumption that anyone present might as well make themselves useful. This simple act represented a complete breakdown of the Empire's psychological warfare model. Vexthor's programming contained millions of combat responses. His neural pathways held protocols for every conceivable military engagement, from close-quarters combat to orbital bombardment strategies. His biological systems could process threats at 40 times human speed, calculating trajectories and evaluating vulnerabilities in milliseconds. None of this helped when presented with a galvanized steel watering can. The Empire's threat assessment algorithms had no category for horticultural assistance. For approximately 2 hours, the galaxy's most feared hunter watered vegetables. His quadruple-jointed limbs, designed for simultaneous combat maneuvers, now performed the rhythmic motion of irrigation. His advanced optical sensors, engineered to track moving targets across kilometers, monitored soil saturation levels. Periodically, he would demonstrate his combat capabilities, launching into practiced intimidation displays or generating energy fields around his free hands. Gideon responded by pointing toward areas that needed more water or commenting on irrigation efficiency. Cognitive dissonance theory explains what happens when actions contradict identity. Vexthor's purpose was intimidation through overwhelming displays of capability. His entire biological design reinforced this singular function. The act of performing mundane agricultural tasks created psychological tension that his systems couldn't resolve. The Empire had engineered a perfect instrument of terror, not a participant in crop maintenance. Gideon continued his weeding with the same concentrated attention he once applied to aircraft stress calculations. The cucumber patches received methodical examination, each weed removed with precise motions. The alien presence became just another environmental variable to accommodate. Like unpredictable weather or pest populations, his engineering background treated the situation as a systems integration challenge rather than a military confrontation. Research into behavioral frameworks shows how practical tasks disrupt aggressive posturing. Engaging in cooperative activities creates cognitive pathways incompatible with hostility. The Empire's psychological models understood fear responses and counter-aggression, but couldn't account for someone redirecting their apex predator into garden maintenance. Their tactical assessments assumed the target would either fight or flee, not put the threat to work. Cassie's documentary footage later captured what she termed a one-sided psychological warfare campaign. The weapon wasn't technology or force but mundane routine. The alien's dramatic performances met with practical suggestions about water distribution. His intimidation displays received comments about their effect on nearby pollinators. The entire encounter became a study in incompatible frameworks for assessing and responding to presence. The Empire's apex predator found himself participating in agricultural maintenance, while his attempts at psychological dominance went largely ignored. His sophisticated biological systems designed for terror became tools for irrigation. His advanced capabilities served vegetable cultivation rather than conquest. The psychological operation had reversed itself through the simple mechanism of practical task assignment. This bizarre standoff continued through the afternoon, a peculiar dance of incompatible agendas playing out among the tomato plants. The alien's occasional attempts to resume his intended role met with the same practical redirection. The situation might have continued indefinitely as a strange agricultural partnership had everything, not changed with a single misstep near the compost heap. Confrontation culminated not in some epic battle but in a routine gardening mishap. Gideon's boot slipped on a damp patch of soil near a partially exposed rock, his weight shifting unexpectedly. The shovel in his hand swung upward in an uncontrolled arc, its movement driven by gravity and momentum rather than intention. It was the kind of clumsy accident that happens countless times daily in gardens across the planet, usually resulting in nothing more than embarrassment or a stubbed toe. Vexthor's reflexes operated at 40 times human normal. His combat systems could track and evade projectile weapons moving at supersonic speeds. He'd been engineered to dodge plasma bursts and energy beams with microscopic precision. The slow, erratic trajectory of the shovel should have been laughably easy to avoid. His neural processors had milliseconds to calculate the appropriate evasion maneuver, but his combat algorithms were designed for intentional attacks. They recognized patterns of aggression, calculated trajectories from weapon discharges, and analyzed body language indicating hostile intent. The system contained protocols for everything from ambush tactics to sniper fire. It had no category for agricultural accidents. The random, uncoordinated movement of a slipping gardener didn't register as a threat requiring evasive action. Highly specialized systems often fail against random, unpredicted events outside their operational parameters. They excel within their designed frameworks but lack the flexibility to handle completely novel situations. The Empire had created the perfect military response system for military engagements. They hadn't accounted for the chaotic randomness of everyday human activity. The shovel blade connected with a hollow thunk that echoed strangely in the quiet field. The sound resembled someone striking a large, expensive drum, a resonant impact that seemed out of proportion to the force behind it. The point of contact was precisely where the alien's thoracic plating met in an intricate biological seam. It was the kind of lucky strike that wouldn't happen again in 1,000 attempts. Sometimes the most significant historical outcomes emerge from unplanned interactions rather than deliberate actions. Major turning points often originate in accidents, coincidences, or unintended consequences rather than grand strategies. The Empire's meticulous planning couldn't accommodate the randomness inherent in human activity. Gideon's response contained no triumph or horror. He didn't celebrate the hit or panic about the consequences. His assessment was purely practical. Well, that's unfortunate. The statement acknowledged the situation's inconvenience without assigning blame or significance. He was already calculating cleanup logistics and potential soil contamination issues. The galaxy's most feared hunter was defeated not by weapons technology or military strategy, but by a tool designed for moving soil. The shovel had been manufactured for agricultural purposes, its design optimized for digging efficiency and durability. It represented human practicality rather than martial capability. The Empire's apex predator fell to Earth literally and metaphorically. As the alien collapsed, the field returned to its agricultural rhythm. Gideon methodically assessed the situation, his engineering mind already problem-solving. The immediate concerns were practical: biological containment, soil preservation, equipment sanitation. The larger implications would require consideration later. The story was far from over. The biological material now coating the field would have consequences nobody could have predicted. 3 months after the incident, Gideon's tomatoes exhibited growth patterns that defied agricultural science. The plants reached heights previously unseen in their variety, with fruit yields doubling his previous records. The vibrant blue organic material that had coated the field gradually integrated into the soil ecosystem, creating a peculiar cerulean tint in the earth that seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence after rainfall. Dr. Amelia Holbrook, a xenobotanist consulting on unusual soil compositions, discovered extraordinary properties in the residual material. Her analysis revealed complex carbon structures arranged in patterns unknown to terrestrial science. The blue substance contained proprietary organic compounds with adaptive cellular properties that seemed to communicate with plant root systems. Her spectrometer reading showed energy signatures that shouldn't exist in biological material. The tomatoes weren't just growing in enhanced soil, they were actively incorporating extraterrestrial genetics. Microscopic examination revealed alien nucleic sequences woven through their cellular structure. The plants developed thicker cuticles that resisted blight, more efficient photosynthetic pathways, and root systems that extracted nutrients with unprecedented efficiency. They were becoming something new, terrestrial and alien simultaneously. Horizontal gene transfer between species often creates unexpected hybrid vigor under optimal conditions. The alien biological material served as a genetic library that Earth plants could access and incorporate. This wasn't contamination, but integration, a biological conversation between evolutionary paths that had developed light years apart. The soil chemistry showed enhancement factors that made conventional fertilizers seem primitive by comparison. The agricultural implications prompted immediate patent considerations. Gideon found himself discussing intellectual property rights for life forms that straddled planetary origins. Agricultural corporations offered substantial sums for exclusive rights to what they termed xenobiological enhancement technology. The legal frameworks for patenting extraterrestrial genome crops didn't exist, requiring entirely new regulatory categories. Conflict byproducts often create unexpected opportunities when viewed through different frameworks. What the Empire considered biological waste became Earth's most valuable agricultural resource. The same material designed for terror and conquest now served growth and sustainability. This transformation represented a fundamental reimagining of value, from military asset to agricultural input. The Krellian Empire's apex predator became Oregon's most effective fertilizer. The biomass distributed across Gideon's field created soil conditions that commercial agricultural products couldn't match. Crop yields across the affected area increased by factors that made agricultural extension agents question their instruments. The plants grew with a vitality that seemed almost conscious in its intensity. Earth's soil transformed alien death into agricultural revolution. The biological material designed for destruction became the foundation for enhanced food production. This reversal represented more than just practical benefit. It demonstrated how context determines function. The Empire's ultimate weapon became Earth's ultimate growth enhancer. When the cleanup fleet returned months later, they anticipated completing a standard annexation protocol. Their tactical projections showed a broken civilization, ready for administrative integration. Their psychological models predicted populations demoralized by the loss of leadership and the demonstration of overwhelming force. Instead, they encountered agricultural innovation that would reshape their entire expansion philosophy. Commander Zal Neth brought her battle fleet into orbit, expecting the standard surrender ceremony. Her tactical displays showed the complete annexation package ready for deployment. Occupation protocols, resource extraction teams, psychological re-education modules. The Imperial playbook called for a swift transition from conquest to administration. Their intelligence briefings confirmed the Apex Hunters' mission parameters had been executed, planetary leadership eliminated, societal structure collapsed, population demoralized. The operation appeared textbook perfect from space. The ground assessment revealed something entirely different. Instead of broken leadership begging for terms, they encountered a farmer discussing soil amendments. Gideon stood beside a series of test plots, explaining nutrient cycling to a confused landing party. His presentation covered nitrogen fixation and mycorrhizal networks, not surrender conditions. The Imperial soldiers found themselves holding specimen containers instead of suppression weapons. Their psychological warfare teams deployed standard analysis protocols designed to uncover hidden advantages. They scanned for concealed military installations, analyzed communication patterns for coded resistance messages, and monitored energy signatures for weapon development. The results showed only agricultural activity and gardening discussions. Their threat assessment algorithms kept returning null readings against a background of crop rotation schedules and compost recipes. Intelligence agencies often struggle with genuinely unexpected outcomes because they assume hidden complexity. The Empire's analysts searched for sophisticated deception campaigns or technological masking. They couldn't process the possibility that the situation contained no hidden layers, that the agricultural focus represented literal reality rather than strategic misdirection. Their training emphasized looking beneath the surface, but sometimes the surface is exactly what it appears. Gideon's calm explanation about using the remains for fertilizer created systemic shock throughout the Imperial command structure. He delivered the information with the same factual tone he might use discussing irrigation techniques. The statement contained no gloating, no defiance, no apparent awareness of its cosmic implications. He simply noted the practical utilization of available organic material with the efficiency of someone who hates waste. Research into communication strategy shows that literal truth delivered without subterfuge often disarms expectation more effectively than deception. The Empire's diplomatic corps had protocols for negotiating under duress. for detecting false statements, for analyzing subtext. They had no preparation for someone stating factual information without any apparent awareness of its shocking nature. The straightforward description of biological repurposing left them without cognitive footing. The suggestion of establishing diplomatic channels emerged naturally from this cognitive dissonance. The imperial negotiators found themselves discussing agricultural exchange instead of surrender terms. The conversation shifted from territorial concessions to soil enhancement techniques. The entire interaction developed a surreal quality where military conquest transformed into horticultural consultation. The empire found itself negotiating with someone who viewed their military technology as potential agricultural input. Gideon inquired about energy field applications for greenhouse climate control, camouflage technology for pest management, and biological material for soil enhancement. His framework treated their advanced capabilities as tools for cultivation rather than conquest. This perspective reversal forced a complete reassessment of priorities and possibilities. This bizarre beginning led to something the Krellians had never attempted in their expansion history: mutually beneficial exchange. The conversation evolved from surrender discussions to exploring collaborative opportunities. The imperial delegates found themselves considering how their technology might serve agricultural development rather than territorial control. The shift represented more than just tactical adjustment. It suggested a fundamental reimagining of interstellar relations. Gideon framed the question with the same practical tone he used for soil testing. Have you ever considered trade agreements? The suggestion emerged not as diplomatic strategy but common sense observation. He noted how their technology might enhance agriculture, while Earth's methods could improve imperial food production. The statement carried no grand vision, just the straightforward logic of mutual benefit. The Krellian leadership found themselves listening to presentations about terroir and soil microbiology instead of surrender terms. Earth's agricultural specialists demonstrated how their practices created food qualities the Empire's replication systems couldn't match. They showed nutrient density comparisons, flavor profile analyses, and shelf life extensions that made Imperial food technology seem primitive. The Emperor's Agricultural Council members leaned forward with unexpected interest. Where the Empire's expansion model saw conquest and resource extraction, Earth's representatives saw exchange and enhancement. They discussed how sustainable practices created long-term stability rather than temporary advantage. The conversation covered soil regeneration techniques that could transform barren colony worlds into productive landscapes. The imperial delegates began recognizing that food security might offer more strategic value than territorial control. Sustainable systems often prove more valuable than extractive ones over extended timelines. They create compounding benefits rather than diminishing returns. The Empire's conquest model required constant resource investment in suppression and administration. Agricultural collaboration promised increasing yields and stability without the overhead of military occupation. The economic calculations began favoring cooperation over domination. The dialogue gradually reframed the Empire's fundamental purpose. Mutual benefit entered their strategic vocabulary alongside traditional terms like annexation and subjugation. Their expansion protocols began incorporating agricultural assessment alongside military evaluation. The shift represented more than policy adjustment. It suggested a philosophical reorientation toward interstellar relations. Paradigm shifts often begin with simple questions that challenge core assumptions. Gideon's straightforward suggestion confronted thousands of years of imperial doctrine. His framing treated interstellar relations as practical problem-solving rather than ideological conflict. The perspective bypassed generations of strategic thinking by addressing more fundamental, human, and apparently alien needs. The galaxy's most fearsome military machine found itself discussing cover cropping techniques. Imperial strategists debated nitrogen fixation alongside troop deployments. Agricultural specialists gained unprecedented influence in policy discussions. The conversation had shifted from how to conquer worlds to how to feed them sustainably. This represented a complete reversal of imperial priorities. Practical agriculture became more strategically valuable than advanced weaponry in interstellar relations. The empire discovered that food security created more stable territories than military occupation. Colonies powered by enhanced agricultural techniques required less suppression and produced more resources. The calculation shifted from cost of conquest to return on agricultural investment. 6 months of diplomacy yielded something the empire had never attempted in its expansion history: formal agricultural exchange programs. The first cohort of imperial agricultural specialists prepared for deployment to Earth research stations. Their mission involved learning soil management techniques rather than implementing administrative control. The transition from conquest to collaboration became institutional policy. Gideon's farm transformed into an interstellar classroom without official designation or curriculum. The 12 acres became a living laboratory where Krellian researchers adapted alien agricultural techniques to terrestrial conditions while learning Earth methods. They arrived with data slates and sensors expecting structured instruction, and found themselves kneeling in soil, testing pH levels with basic chemical strips. The transition from theoretical study to hands-on application created unexpected cognitive shifts. Students bred for strategic warfare operations learned empirical testing through compost temperature monitoring. Officers trained in fleet maneuvers found themselves charting irrigation efficiency rates. The imperial education system had emphasized abstract tactical planning and psychological domination techniques. They had no protocols for assessing soil composition or identifying nutrient deficiencies through plant discoloration patterns. The shift from conquest strategy to agricultural management represented a fundamental reorientation of purpose. Hands-on learning often creates deeper understanding than theoretical study, particularly across cultural divides. The physical act of planting seeds or turning compost generated questions no simulation could prompt. Imperial researchers discovered that feeling soil texture conveyed information no sensor reading could match. They began understanding seasonal cycles not as data points, but as lived experience requiring adaptation and patience. This tactile knowledge created bridges where formal diplomacy had struggled. The transformation became codified in imperial policy documents. Crop diversification and rotation entered strategic planning as valued components of stable expansion. Military procurement budgets began allocating resources to irrigation systems alongside weapons development. The shift represented more than policy adjustment. It signaled a redefinition of what constituted strategic advantage in interstellar relations. Ambassadors and engineers collaboratively mapped Earth's role in the new trade networks. They translated agricultural practices into cultural exchange, recognizing that food production methods reflected deeper societal values. The discussions covered everything from water conservation techniques to seed preservation traditions. These practical exchanges built diplomatic connections that formal negotiations had failed to establish across previous annexations. Shared practical activities often build diplomatic bridges where formal negotiations struggle. Working together in fields created camaraderie that conference rooms never fostered. Imperial delegates found themselves discussing soil amendments with the same intensity they once reserved for territorial disputes. The common focus on tangible outcomes shifted discussions from ideological positions to practical solutions. As one Krellian diplomat observed, the expansion protocol emphasizing mutual benefit over conquest was taking hold. The institutional mindset gradually shifted from assessing how to control territories to determining how to enhance their productivity. This represented a philosophical evolution in imperial thinking, a recognition that sustainable systems offered more stability than suppression. Imperial policy documents began prioritizing irrigation maintenance with the same urgency once reserved for fleet maneuvers. Crop health assessments received equal weighting with military readiness reports. The change permeated bureaucratic structures, influencing resource allocation and strategic planning at all levels. Agriculture became recognized as fundamental to stable expansion, rather than an administrative afterthought. The agricultural revolution continued unfolding through unexpected planetary-scale partnerships. Imperial engineers began designing atmospheric processors adapted for Earth-grown crops on colony worlds. Terrestrial agricultural specialists consulted on soil regeneration projects across former conquest zones. The collaboration created networks of practical knowledge exchange that transcended political boundaries. What began as military confrontation evolved into a shared project of sustainable development. Krellian engineers recalibrated atmospheric processors originally designed for terraforming operations to accommodate Earth-specific crops on colony worlds. Their soil analytic systems, once optimized for mineral extraction assessments, now measured organic content and microbial diversity. The technical collaboration revealed unexpected biological compatibilities that neither species could have predicted. Enzymes from terrestrial plants interacted with alien soil compounds in ways that enhanced nutrient availability. Photosynthetic processes adapted to different stellar spectra showed remarkable convergence in energy efficiency. These discoveries suggested evolutionary pathways that sometimes arrived at similar solutions across light years of separation. Imperial traditionalists resisted the agricultural reorientation with bureaucratic obstinacy. Military commanders argued that food security shouldn't outweigh defensive capabilities. Procurement officers questioned allocating resources to farming equipment over weapon systems. Their resistance took the form of delayed approvals and requoted regulations rather than open opposition. The institutional inertia of millennia of conquest doctrine couldn't be overcome through policy. Alone, it required demonstration of tangible benefits. Krellian research team's mushroom cultivation experiment provided that demonstration. They introduced terrestrial fungal species to imperial agricultural stations with remarkable results. The mycelial networks adapted to alien substrates with unprecedented efficiency, breaking down previously Wangu compounds into bioavailable nutrients. The project progressed so successfully that it became a case study in cross-species biological compatibility. The mushrooms flourished where specialized imperial bioengineered solutions had previously struggled. Biological compatibility often surprises even experts, because evolution sometimes converges on similar molecular solutions across worlds. Proteins fold in thermodynamically favorable patterns. Enzymes develop comparable active sites for breaking down similar compounds. The fundamental chemistry of life follows physical laws that remain constant across the galaxy. What appeared to be miraculous compatibility was actually nature finding parallel pathways under similar constraints. The shared knowledge base made diplomatic progress, visible in physical landscapes rather than abstract agreements. Former battlefields transitioned to experimental farms. Military transport vessels carried soil samples instead of munitions. The collaboration created tangible outcomes that populations could see and touch. Fields of alien grains growing alongside terrestrial vegetables, irrigation systems combining technologies from both species. This physical evidence of cooperation proved more convincing than any treaty signature. Concrete collaborative projects often achieve more than abstract agreements because they create shared stakes in success. When imperial and terrestrial scientists worked together to solve irrigation challenges on arid colony worlds, they developed personal investments in each other's methods. The practical problem-solving created bonds that formal diplomacy couldn't establish. Seeing a field of wheat thriving where nothing grew before carried more weight than pages of negotiated terms. Even the emperor's chief scientific advisors recognized that food security now drove imperial policy as much as military considerations. Their reports emphasized sustainable agricultural development as the foundation of stable expansion. They argued that well-fed populations required less suppression and produced more resources. The economic calculations clearly favored investment in cultivation over conquest. The shift represented a fundamental reorientation of imperial strategy based on demonstrable results rather than ideological preference. Interstellar relations became grounded in soil chemistry and crop yields rather than weapons technology. Trade agreements specified fertilizer compositions alongside tariff rates. Diplomatic meetings included agricultural specialists alongside political negotiators. The conversation shifted from territorial control to nutritional density, from military advantage to food security. This practical foundation created more stable relationships than any show of force could achieve. Gideon's retirement transformed into something nobody could have predicted when he first noticed sunlight obstruction in his tomato patch. The man who preferred soil testing to interstellar politics found himself advising on agricultural policy across multiple star systems. His methodical approach to problem-solving, once confined to 12 acres of Oregon farmland, now influenced imperial expansion protocols. The transition happened so gradually he barely noticed it himself. Gideon remained a farmer who occasionally advised interstellar policy. His primary concern stayed with soil composition and irrigation schedules, though his input now influenced agricultural protocols across multiple star systems. He guided an exchange program that fundamentally reshaped imperial expansion methods, transitioning them from military conquest to sustainable development. The man who preferred testing pH levels to political negotiations found his practical approach institutionalized in alien bureaucracies. Cassie's documentary evolved from local agricultural reporting to galaxy-spanning educational material. Her film, From Pest Control to Peace Treaty, became required viewing in imperial diplomatic training programs. The footage of bees avoiding invisible predators and gardening accidents altering cosmic history provided case studies in unexpected conflict resolution. What began as sustainable farming documentation became a meditation on practical problem-solving against overwhelming odds. 17 languages broadcast. Gideon's farming methods across 47 Krellian systems. His straightforward explanations of crop rotation and compost techniques reached audiences that had never seen soil. The transmissions showed proper seeding techniques alongside demonstrations of irrigation efficiency. The content contained no grand philosophy, only practical instructions for improving yields through better cultivation methods. Sometimes the most effective messengers come from unexpected backgrounds rather than formal positions. Gideon's authority derived from visible results rather than political appointment. His tomato yield spoke louder than diplomatic pronouncements. The imperial audiences responded to practical demonstrations more than theoretical arguments. They trusted someone who showed them how to grow food better rather than someone telling them what to believe. Alien sun lamps now glowed over fields where human agricultural specialists worked alongside imperial researchers. The collaboration created hybrid growing systems combining technologies from both species. The same biological material that once served as an instrument of terror now enhanced soil fertility across multiple worlds. The universe's most feared predator became part of a broader campaign for mutual growth and sustenance. Lasting change often integrates into daily practice rather than arriving through dramatic declarations. The imperial shift from conquest to collaboration manifested in changed agricultural methods rather than revised treaties. Farmers across former conflict zones adopted new techniques that improved their livelihoods. The transformation happened through practical adoption rather than ideological conversion. People changed their methods before they changed their minds. The closing line of Cassio's documentary featured Gideon's pragmatic observation about interstellar relations. He stood beside particularly robust tomato plants, their roots fed by alien biological material, their fruits demonstrating the unexpected benefits of cross-species collaboration. His statement carried no grand vision, only the practical wisdom gained through hands-on experience with both horticulture and interstellar diplomacy. Sometimes the most effective resistance involves continuing ordinary routines despite extraordinary circumstances. Gideon's commitment to his gardening schedule created psychological stability that no threat could disrupt. His focus on tangible tasks, measuring soil acidity, adjusting irrigation, monitoring plant health, provided an anchor against theatrical intimidation. The mundane became a fortress against the spectacular. This psychological victory established the conditions for physical resolution long before the accidental shovel strike. The Empire's terror model had already failed through non-participation. Their psychological warfare systems were designed to process fear and counter aggression, not practical indifference. The framework had collapsed before the physical confrontation occurred. The accident merely confirmed what the psychological dynamics had already established. Vexthor's systems couldn't process an opponent who refused to play by combat rules. His specialized design left him vulnerable to situations outside military parameters. The physical resolution emerged from psychological conditions that made such an accident possible and decisive. This psychological dimension reveals why specialized systems often fail against adaptable practicality. The Empire's perfect instrument of terror couldn't handle someone who viewed him as a gardening inconvenience. Their psychological model contained no protocols for targets more concerned with vegetable yields than interstellar politics. The confrontation was lost in the mind before it was settled in the field. The Krellian transformation represented more than policy adjustment. It constituted a fundamental reimagining of expansion philosophy. For millennia, their operating protocol followed a brutal simplicity: conquer through intimidation, then extract resources through suppression. This model created endless administrative burdens as occupied populations required constant monitoring and frequent military intervention to maintain control. The costs of domination often outweighed the benefits of acquisition, creating a cycle of expenditure that strained imperial resources across multiple fronts. Earth's approach of mutual benefit through agricultural exchange offered a sustainable alternative to constant suppression. Instead of consuming resources through military occupation, this model created them through collaborative development. The Empire discovered that improving agricultural yields on subject worlds generated more value than extracting existing resources through force. Populations that benefited from improved food security became more cooperative and required less oversight. The economic calculations shifted from cost of control to return on investment. Where military expansion drained resources through constant conflict, agricultural collaboration generated surplus through improved efficiency. The Empire found that teaching conquered worlds advanced farming techniques created loyal populations rather than resistant ones. The same territories that once required garrisons now became productive partners. The shift from extraction to enhancement transformed the fundamental economics of interstellar expansion. Sustainable systems often prove more stable and productive than extractive models over extended timelines. They create compounding benefits rather than diminishing returns. The Empire's military model required ever-increasing investment in suppression, as occupied populations resisted over generations. The agricultural approach generated increasing yields and stability, without proportional increases in administrative overhead. The long-term strategic advantages became impossible to ignore. The cultural transformation manifested in personnel evaluations and resource allocation. Soil analysts gained equivalent status to military strategists in imperial planning sessions. Irrigation engineers received budgets comparable to weapons developers. This represented a revolution in values that permeated the entire bureaucratic structure. The definition of strategic advantage expanded to include food security alongside military capability. Paradigm shifts often begin at practical levels, then work upward through institutional structures. The initial collaboration in Gideon's field demonstrated tangible benefits that theoretical arguments couldn't match. Once imperial administrators saw the yield improvements and stability gains, the philosophical arguments for military expansion lost their persuasive power. Practical results proved more convincing than ideological positions. This evolution represented effectiveness through adaptation rather than surrender through defeat. The Empire became more successful by changing methods rather than intensifying existing approaches. Their expansion became more sustainable, their territories more stable, their resources more productive. The shift demonstrated that sometimes advancement involves not doing the same things better, but doing entirely different things. The implications extend beyond this single interstellar encounter to broader questions about innovation and conflict resolution. The story suggests that specialized systems often develop vulnerabilities to simpler, more adaptable approaches. It demonstrates how practical knowledge applied consistently can defeat advanced technology designed for narrow purposes. The confrontation between biological engineering and basic gardening tools produced outcomes that neither side could have predicted through conventional analysis. Significant historical turning points often arrive through unplanned events, rather than deliberate strategies. The shovel strike that altered galactic history wasn't some calculated combat maneuver. It was a gardening accident, the kind of clumsy mishap that happens countless times daily across Earth. The Empire's meticulous planning accounted for every conceivable military response but couldn't simulate random accidents outside combat parameters. Their models accounted for panic, aggression, even calculated surrender, not slippery soil and lost footing. This pattern repeats throughout terrestrial history. Unexpected events creating opportunities that deliberate planning misses. Great designs and careful strategies often get overturned by chance occurrences that nobody could have predicted. The Empire's specialization made them particularly vulnerable to this phenomenon. Their systems operated with perfect efficiency within defined parameters, but lacked the flexibility to handle completely novel situations. Complex systems often develop vulnerabilities to random events that simpler more adaptable systems can leverage. The more specialized and optimized a system becomes, the more it risks failure when confronted with something outside its operational framework. The Empire's psychological warfare model represented the pinnacle of specialized development and consequently extreme vulnerability to unexpected inputs. Gideon's practical adaptability allowed him to incorporate the accident into his ongoing work seamlessly. Where the Empire saw catastrophe, he saw agricultural opportunity. The biological material became fertilizer rather than contamination. The incident transformed from confrontation to resource acquisition through cognitive reframing. This ability to leverage unexpected events often determines success more than perfect planning could ever achieve. Research into complex systems shows that adaptability frequently outperforms optimization in unpredictable environments. The capacity to incorporate accidents and surprises into ongoing work creates resilience that rigid planning cannot match. Gideon's engineering background had taught him that unexpected results often reveal more than predicted outcomes. His farming experience reinforced that nature frequently operates outside human expectations. The entire interstellar diplomatic revolution emerged from this unintended gardening mishap. The Empire's return, the agricultural exchanges, the policy transformations, all traced back to a random slip on damp soil. The elaborate diplomatic structures and trade agreements built upon a foundation of pure accident, refined through practical adaptation rather than strategic design. Historical analysis frequently reveals how major transitions originate in unforeseen events rather than grand designs. The capacity to respond productively to accidents often proves more valuable than the ability to execute perfect plans. The Empire's meticulous conquest protocol collapsed because it couldn't accommodate the randomness inherent in human activity. Sometimes history turns not on great designs but on practical adaptations to accidents. The ability to incorporate unexpected events into ongoing work creates opportunities that planning cannot anticipate. The specialization that makes systems efficient within their domains often makes them vulnerable to novelty outside those domains. This story's deeper meaning lies in what it reveals about human ingenuity when confronting the unexpected. Our species' tendency toward practical problem-solving creates resilience that specialized systems cannot duplicate. The capacity to treat accidents as opportunities rather than failures represents a form of intelligence that transcends technological advancement. The core revelation emerged through understated observation rather than triumphant declaration. The Empire's entire psychological warfare model had encountered something their simulations never predicted: practical indifference followed by productive utilization. Their technology designed for destruction became tools for cultivation. Their methods of intimidation became subjects of agricultural study. The reversal was both complete and curiously undramatic. Sometimes the best way to conquer a world is to teach it how to grow better tomatoes. The statement contained no military terminology, but revealed strategic insight that weapons developers missed. Sustainable food production created more stable territories than military occupation. Agricultural improvement built more loyal populations than suppression campaigns. The practical approach proved more effective than the theatrical one. This story reveals deeper truths about resilience and ingenuity when facing overwhelming force. It demonstrates how specialized systems can fail against adaptable practicality. It shows how ordinary knowledge applied consistently can defeat extraordinary technology designed for narrow purposes. The confrontation between advanced biological engineering and basic gardening tools produced unexpected outcomes that neither side could have predicted through conventional analysis. Vexthor embodied the pinnacle of specialized biological engineering, a masterpiece of targeted function. His design specifications read like a military contractor's ultimate wish list. Reflexes 40 times human normal, adaptive camouflage that could mimic any environment, quad-limb combat coordination. Every biological system served the singular purpose of intimidation and elimination within carefully defined combat parameters. He represented excellence within a narrow operational framework, the perfect instrument for predictable military engagements. Gideon's knowledge operated on entirely different principles. His farming expertise was broad, practical, and fundamentally adaptable. Where the hunter's systems were designed for specific threat responses, the farmer's understanding could be applied to unexpected situations. His engineering background provided systematic problem-solving skills, while his agricultural experience offered environmental awareness. This combination created a cognitive toolkit designed for flexibility rather than specialization. The contrast became apparent in their perceptual frameworks. Vexthor's sensors detected threats, weapons, defensive positions, all filtered through combat algorithms. Gideon observed light patterns affecting plant growth, soil composition variations, water distribution efficiency. The same field represented entirely different datasets to each of them. The alien saw tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. The human saw agricultural variables and growing conditions. General practical knowledge often outperforms specialized expertise when confronting novel challenges outside expected parameters. Research into adaptive expertise shows that broad transferable skills frequently defeat narrow specialization in unexpected situations. Gideon's engineering mindset allowed him to analyze rather than react, to assess rather than assume. His thought processes weren't constrained by predetermined combat protocols. The alien's technology failed against basic observation and ecological awareness because it was designed for different contexts. The adaptive camouflage perfected for military infiltration couldn't hide from bee behavior patterns. The sophisticated combat reflexes couldn't process a random gardening accident. The systems operated perfectly within their intended environments, but became liabilities when those parameters changed unexpectedly. Context determines effectiveness, absolutely. Technologies and strategies that excel in one setting often fail miserably in another. The Empire's psychological warfare model assumed military engagement contexts. Their systems were designed to counter advanced weaponry and organized resistance. They had no protocols for dealing with someone more concerned with irrigation schedules than interstellar conquest. The specialization that made them formidable in battle made them vulnerable in agricultural settings. This fundamental mismatch between specialized technology and adaptive practical knowledge created the Empire's critical blind spot. Their entire conquest model relied on predictable responses to displays of power. They understood fear, aggression, counterattacks, all the standard reactions to military threats. They couldn't process practical indifference or the redirection of their capabilities toward mundane tasks. Their systems were too specialized to adapt to completely novel frameworks. Earth's defense emerged from domain knowledge applied to unexpected situations, rather than matching force with force. Gideon didn't try to build better weapons or develop counter-technology. He applied agricultural problem-solving to an interstellar threat. He treated the alien presence as another environmental variable to manage, rather than an enemy to defeat. This approach leveraged his existing expertise rather than attempting to compete within the Empire's specialized domain. The victory came through practical adaptation rather than technological superiority. The shovel worked where energy weapons would have failed precisely because it existed outside combat parameters. The watering can disrupted psychological warfare because it introduced an incompatible behavioral framework. The solutions emerged from applying everyday knowledge to extraordinary circumstances. The psychological dimensions of this conflict proved equally important to the physical ones. While the accidental shovel strike provided the physical resolution, the psychological groundwork had already been laid through Gideon's consistent practical approach. His indifference to intimidation tactics and redirection of the threat into productive channels created the conditions where accident could become decisive. The Empire's entire psychological warfare model collapsed not from counter-propaganda but from practical disregard. Vexthor's entire biological design centered on provoking specific fear responses. His neural pathways contained precise triggers for intimidation success. Elevated heart rates, adrenaline spikes, the chemical signatures of panic. His performance metrics relied on measurable psychological reactions across dozens of physiological parameters. The Empire had engineered him to be the ultimate stimulus for predictable fear, a biological instrument fine-tuned across millennia of conquests. Gideon's complete lack of fear created systemic dissonance in this carefully calibrated system. The farmer's practical focus on gardening problems provided no emotional feedback for the predator's performance. Where Vexthor expected terror, he encountered problem-solving. Instead of panicked reactions, he received suggestions about water distribution. The absence of expected responses left his psychological warfare systems without operational parameters. Psychological warfare fundamentally requires participation to function effectively. Fear only achieves its intended effect if the target actually experiences fear. Intimidation relies on reciprocal engagement. The subject must recognize and respond to the threat presentation. Gideon's indifference created a psychological vacuum where the Empire's carefully crafted terror tactics dissipated without effect. The performance met an audience that refused to play its assigned role. Research into resistance strategies shows that indifference can disrupt intimidation tactics more effectively than counter-aggression. Fighting back acknowledges the threat framework. Ignoring it completely dismantles the confrontation's basic premises. Gideon's practical focus on vegetables refused to engage with the cosmic significance Vexthor represented. This non-participation proved more disarming than any military response. By treating interstellar conquest as another gardening variable, Gideon cognitively reframed the entire encounter outside combat parameters. The alien became another environmental factor to manage rather than an enemy to defeat. This psychological repositioning transformed the confrontation from military engagement to agricultural problem-solving. The shift in framework neutralized the threat without ever addressing it directly. Cognitive reframing represents a powerful psychological tool for neutralizing overwhelming threats. It changes the context of perception rather than the object being perceived. Gideon's perspective treated Vexthor as he would an unpredictable weather pattern or pest infestation, something to work around rather than confront. This mental repositioning created psychological immunity to intimidation attempts. The alien's increasingly frustrated demonstrations met with consistent, practical assessment. His energy displays received comments about their effect on pollination. His intimidation postures prompted observations about soil compaction. His dramatic declarations were met with questions about irrigation efficiency. Each performance was measured against agricultural metrics rather than cosmic significance. Human ingenuity often manifests most powerfully in responses to unexpected events rather than execution of planned actions. The ability to adapt, incorporate, and repurpose defines our species' particular form of intelligence. This practical flexibility creates advantages that specialized systems cannot anticipate or counter. Gideon represented not some unique genius, but humanity's collective practical intelligence at work. His farming methods distilled generations of agricultural knowledge, crop rotation practices refined over centuries, soil management techniques perfected through trial and error. His engineering background reflected human technological achievement, systematized through industrial development. He was a living repository of distributed human knowledge, not an exceptional outlier. The Krellian Empire had encountered individual brilliance before, scientists who revolutionized physics, generals who mastered strategy, artists who transformed cultures, but they'd never faced this particular form of intelligence. Practical knowledge spread across populations, embedded in daily practices rather than concentrated in specialists. It was defense through distributed capability rather than centralized expertise. Earth's resilience emerged from ordinary human capacities applied consistently. Observation skills sharpened through agricultural necessity. Adaptation honed by variable growing conditions. Problem-solving refined through mechanical repairs. These weren't exceptional abilities, but common human competencies developed through everyday life. The Empire's systems were designed to counter exceptional threats, not widespread ordinary capabilities. Collective intelligence often resides in practical knowledge distributed across societies rather than concentrated in specialists. Research into cognitive systems shows that groups frequently solve problems more effectively through distributed contributions than through centralized direction. The whole becomes more than the sum of its parts through complementary strengths and varied perspectives. This distributed model creates resilience that centralized systems lack. The defense unfolded through multiple unrelated contributions. The bee's avoidance behavior signaled the camouflage's presence through ecological awareness. Cassie's documentary work accidentally captured visual distortions while filming pollination patterns. Gideon's gardening maintained practical routines that disrupted psychological warfare. Each contributed without coordination, their actions emerging from domain-specific knowledge rather than strategic planning. Distributed intelligence systems can respond to novel threats more effectively than centralized ones. They allow multiple approaches to develop simultaneously, rather than depending on single solutions. The lack of centralized control creates flexibility that rigid command structures cannot match. Adaptations emerge organically from local knowledge, rather than being imposed through top-down directives. Humanities. Resilience wasn't about exceptional individuals, but ordinary capabilities applied consistently. The same practical mindset that fixed irrigation systems also assessed alien technology. The same observational skills that tracked plant health detected camouflage anomalies. The Empire faced not a coordinated defense but a distributed network of practical problem-solving. Sometimes the most powerful defense is the collective practical intelligence that permeates daily life. It's the accumulated knowledge of how things work and how to fix them when they don't. This intelligence resides in hands as much as minds, in practices as much as theories. It represents human adaptability, expressed through concrete action rather than abstract calculation. The story's conclusion reflects this distributed intelligence scaling into interstellar collaboration. The agricultural exchange programs involved thousands of participants across both species. The knowledge transfer happened through shared practice rather than formal instruction. The transformation emerged from countless small interactions rather than grand diplomatic gestures. What began as individual practical responses evolved into collective progress. The Empire's ultimate weapon became Earth's ultimate fertilizer through this distributed intelligence. The biological material was repurposed through practical assessment rather than strategic decision. The outcome emerged from how people used what was available rather than what authorities planned. This bottom-up adaptation proved more effective than top-down design. The distributed nature of human practical intelligence created strengths that specialized systems couldn't anticipate or counter. It allowed multiple responses to develop simultaneously, different approaches to be tested, and the most effective solutions to emerge organically. This flexibility proved more valuable than any single technological advantage. The story's ending shows this distributed model expanding across species boundaries. The collaboration works because it builds on shared practical activities rather than abstract agreements. People from different worlds working together in fields created understanding that negotiations couldn't achieve. The distributed intelligence that defended Earth now enhances multiple civilizations. Bexthor's bioengineering represented the absolute peak of imperial technological achievement, a marvel of specialized biological design refined across millennia of conquests. His specifications included capabilities that seemed lifted from military science fiction. Light-bending camouflage, neurological processing at 40 times human speed, quadruple limb combat coordination. Every system reflected generations of research and development focused on a singular purpose: overwhelming psychological intimidation through flawless physical performance. The investment in this single organism likely exceeded the gross planetary product of smaller civilizations they'd conquered. His adaptive camouflage could defeat advanced sensor arrays in military detection systems, yet failed against honeybee navigation patterns. The technology bent light with microscopic precision, but couldn't mask the subtle electromagnetic disturbances or scent signatures that triggered insect avoidance behaviors. His reflexes could track and evade supersonic projectiles, yet couldn't process the random, uncoordinated motion of a slipping gardener. The systems operated with perfect efficiency within their design parameters but became liabilities when those parameters shifted unexpectedly. This irony reflects a broader pattern, observable throughout technological history. Advanced systems often develop critical blind spots to simple solutions. The Empire's specialization created excellence within narrow operational frameworks but vulnerability outside them. Their psychological warfare model understood military responses, but couldn't process practical indifference. Their combat algorithms recognized intentional attacks but had no category for agricultural accidents. The very precision that made them formidable in battle made them fragile in novel situations. Technological advancement sometimes creates unexpected fragility through over-specialization. Systems optimized for specific tasks often lose the flexibility to handle completely novel challenges. The Empire had engineered the perfect instrument for military conquest, but couldn't adapt when the situation departed from combat parameters. Their technology became increasingly sophisticated within its domain, while becoming increasingly vulnerable outside it. Earth's simpler tools and methods proved more adaptable to these unexpected situations. The shovel existed outside combat considerations entirely. It was designed for moving soil, not fighting battles. The watering can introduced behavioral frameworks incompatible with hostility. The beehives provided detection capabilities no military sensor could duplicate. These solutions emerged from practical needs rather than theoretical optimization, making them inherently flexible in application. Appropriate technology often outperforms advanced technology in novel contexts because it retains broader applicability. Systems designed for specific functions excel within those functions but struggle when requirements change. General-purpose tools maintain effectiveness across varying conditions because they weren't optimized for particular scenarios. The Empire's technology was too specialized to handle situations its designers hadn't anticipated. The shovel worked where energy weapons would have failed precisely because it operated outside combat parameters. It represented a tool designed for cultivation rather than destruction, making it unpredictable within military frameworks. Its random, uncoordinated motion didn't register as a threat requiring evasive action. The Empire's systems were too specialized to recognize danger from something outside their threat models. Sometimes technological advancement creates vulnerability to simpler, more adaptable approaches. The pursuit of optimization within narrow domains often sacrifices flexibility across broader contexts. Systems designed for perfect performance under specific conditions frequently fail when those conditions change unexpectedly. The specialization that creates capability also creates constraint. This technological irony leads to final considerations about what this story suggests about innovation and adaptation. The confrontation between advanced biological engineering and basic gardening tools demonstrates how context determines effectiveness. The same systems that represented overwhelming advantage in military engagements became liabilities in agricultural settings. The specialization that enabled conquest also enabled defeat. The galaxy's most feared predator now fertilizes Oregon tomatoes, and both species emerged improved by the encounter. Consider where your ordinary expertise might address extraordinary challenges that specialists overlook. The practical knowledge you apply daily contains unexpected value beyond its intended purpose. Sometimes the universe's most significant transformations begin with ordinary people solving mundane problems. What appears routine might contain solutions for challenges nobody anticipated. The specialized often miss what the practical can leverage. Your daily work could reshape realities beyond your current imagining.